Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just extremely pleased and honored to have Ning McKenzie here to talk with us today. I and my colleague Irma will be your kind of co-hosts here, answering questions and moderating. So I am just going to turn it over to Ning and just ask her to tell me a little bit about herself and her journey. And then we have questions that we can, you can feel free to put them in the box, in the chat box, and we'll answer your questions if there's something we can answer, or we'll ask Ning. Or once she gets through, this can be a very casual conversation since there's not very many of us, and you can just unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. So thanks again for coming, and take it away, Ning.
Yeah, so as Joe said, definitely want to keep this casual if that's something that's more comfortable. I think I often zone out when somebody starts talking for too long, but I will start with an introduction. But again, feel free to use the chat and unmute and keep this interactive. So tell me about yourself. So what I said in my interviews, I actually always started with my childhood, which seems like a decent place to start anyways. So I grew up with my dad, who does construction, was like taught me to work with my hands and do a lot of like arts and crafts, and I really loved doing that. And then my mom had a small business, and so I did some of that like organization stuff and really enjoyed it. And she's also a scientist, so grew up being very nerdy and loving science. So when I came to Cal, I knew I wanted to be a math major. Very odd decision to make thinking about when I was 17 and knowing that that's what I wanted to do. But I was interested in medicine, and because I've always loved, science, but also applied to people. I was a hardcore veterinary kid. I loved the idea of healing animals, but I really kind of grew to like working with people as well. So that seemed like a pretty fluid thing, but I was always really interested in math. So I majored in math and tried to keep an open mind during undergrad because, you have 4 years. That's a lot of time to explore. And so I tried to take a lot of things. I took linguistics and anthropology and a bunch of different classes just to try it out. I ended up graduating with math and MCB. And the MCB was really just because I had taken the pre-med requirements. I thought genetics was really interesting, but I really enjoyed having math classes, kind of a life outside of medicine. When I was in undergrad, I did some organizations that you guys might have heard of for pre-med stuff. I was part of SPAN, which is the Student Pre-Med Advising Network. And then I spent a lot of time with the MRC, which is the Berkeley Medical Reserve Corps. I also worked with RockMed, which is similarly, both of those organizations I volunteered as an EMT. And so I would go to like the basketball games, football games. Don't know if those are happening now, but at the time there were a lot of people, and it was just nice to have a first aid team on site. So that's what I did in undergrad that really solidified that I wanted to be in medicine, because I was seeing patients, I was getting to have autonomy with my patients. And I enjoyed it so much. Like I would get home at 1 or 2 a.m. and I was so energized, I could barely go to sleep because I thought it was such a fun night to be able to do that. So yeah, I did my EMT training during freshman year, got a couple years of EMT volunteering experience, and I applied my junior summer, did not take a gap year, and then started in 2020 in med school. So now I'm here. It's been a year. It's been a really fun and challenging year, and I've met some really awesome people. But I know you guys are kind of all over between just starting off and applying. So I'm curious to hear what questions you guys have, whether that's kind of where I am at now or where I was back in undergrad. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, shoot them away. I know, oh, there's a question. Yeah, so sorry, an EMT is an emergency medical technician. And so basically there are different certifications you can get without a bachelor's degree that are like medical providers. And so one of those would be CNA, that's a certified nursing assistant, where you can work in like often nursing homes where you help people, you help the patients like change out their sheets and look at their medications and make sure that everything's happening smoothly. EMT is on a different side of that. So that's pre-hospital. So what you would think of is ambulance or even just like medical tents. There's something called street medicine that's kind of I think an international organization kind of loosely affiliated that I'm hoping to volunteer with now because it's something that I really like. And basically you just go and look at homeless or unhoused populations and see if they need medical care. So an EMT would do things like that, where you're seeing a patient for the first time, often out in the world, and then you bring them to the hospital. Yeah. And the process for being an EMT is you can take, there were a couple places, I know Joe would have the most updated list of the trainings in the area, but there's like DFID this and Bear EMT. So you could take like a semester or two of night courses or weekend courses. I did a summer course, which was, I think, 6 weeks. There's a length of like 4 to 10 weeks, I think, of how long the training sessions are. And then you have to take a national test, get your certification. And that's how you end up getting the certification. Okay, let me know if you have any more questions about EMT, because it's something that I really enjoyed, but definitely takes more time and cost than some other volunteer opportunities that you might do. So it's something you would want to consider. And then the first year, I think I was really scared about the first year of medical school. Everyone told me that it was going to be so difficult. And I don't know if you guys have heard, there's some analogies that people give. So they'll say you're drinking from the fire hose. There's one, it's like every day you're given 10 pancakes. And if you don't eat your 10 pancakes every day, then it becomes unmanageable, because then the next day you have 20 pancakes, and then the next day you have 30 pancakes. So it's one of those things that you have to keep up with constantly, or else it becomes overwhelming. I think those are true for sure. But we've had really great staff and admin support and wonderful teachers, great TAs, people that are there to help out. I think my primary resource has been my classmates and classmates from previous years that made amazing study guides. And at least in our school, study guides are widely distributed. They're not, there's some schools that like, they always ask for $5 whenever you use it. Like, that's not our system. We just share them with the class. And so academically, it was challenging, but doable. I mean, Berkeley classes are hard. MCB 102, 104, those are classes that people really struggle with. And if you imagine that you were just taking MCB 104, or whatever upper division bio class, if you were taking that material, but you were taking it instead of the course of 16 weeks, you were taking it like over the course of 4 weeks. You know, it's definitely condensed. You're working every day and you're taking the same material every day, at least at our school. But it is doable. It's like the same material that you've seen before, just in a different context. And socially, medical school has been really great. I've met some really wonderful people. I've been on some great adventures, and so it's actually been, I always feel bad saying this, but I think it's been the best year of my life. And people say, like, how could medical school be the best of your life? You must have had great years in undergrad. But I think there's something really freeing about working hard in undergrad and then getting here and being able to just kind of let go. It's like freshman year again, where you just go, oh, I have no obligation to do all these extracurriculars. I can just enjoy and do what I want to. I see Yasmin had a question about what helped me stand out in my application to medical school. No, I think about this a lot because our class is very heterogeneous. There's not really, I remember asking admissions at the time if there was some single thread that is seen in all their students. And I think they said something like, they just want to be helpful, or they're very open. And it seemed like a very vague statement, but it's because I don't think there's anything else that you could really point to and say, well, they all did X amount of hours of research, or had particular leadership positions. And so if you asked any of us, we would have a very different answer. And for myself, I think the things that stood out about me, I think I had an unusual childhood. I was homeschooled until the age of 15. And so I always feel bad sharing, like, oh, the most unique thing is something that's already passed for you. That's not something you can really build, but you know, you can reflect on your own life and think about what are the factors in your childhood that may have really shaped you. That's one possible place. It doesn't have to be from undergrad. And so being homeschooled, I was able to really participate a lot in what my parents did. I was able to spend a lot of time studying the things I wanted to and really directing my own learning. which has been helpful in college and medical school where the teachers are a little bit more hands-off. What else stood out? I think in terms of my college curriculars, I think people were interested in the volunteer work that I'd done, particular what patients I found to be really meaningful. And so one of the most important things I think is to reflect on the most important experiences you've had. So every time I came back and I thought, wow, that's a memory that's really going to stick with me, I would go back and just spend like 5 minutes journaling about it. How did it feel? What was so special about that experience? Like a patient that I was just having trouble with and I wasn't assertive enough. I thought to myself, okay, I felt challenged by that. But I think that it taught me a lot of good autonomy and taught me that there's a role in being not just like very nice as a provider and for the patient's good. I think that those were lessons that I ended up reflecting on and realizing that's why it was so influential. And then I could speak to it more in my application. Additionally, I did a lot of mentorship. That's just something I enjoyed. I wouldn't say everyone has to do, but for myself, I really liked mentoring. I started a mentorship program within the math major that was just like my passion project. It was something I really enjoyed. I don't know if it ended up helping me stand out, but I think I just did things that I liked and then hoped that they would be something that they would ask me about, because if they asked me about it, I knew I could share something that would, that they could connect with on some level. So I made sure most of my extracurriculars I put on my application were things I really could speak to and that I really enjoyed. And if there was anything that I was doing that I didn't think was sparking any joy, I would think to myself, okay, there's something else that could take up more time in my life. There's something I could replace with that and just kind of weed it out. So very long-winded question and not very specific, but let's see, I have another question. Oh, what did I do during my undergrad summers? So let's see, the first summer was freshman year. I think I went to China with my mom and traveled for about 7 weeks. I spent most of my summer overseas because I just hadn't been out of the country really much, and that's part of my culture. And so I spent the first half having fun, as you should. And then I came back and did an accelerated EMT certification course, which was actually really wonderful as well. But that was just kind of getting it out early so that I didn't have to worry about it during the semester. But I really am glad I also went and just like relaxed for almost 2 months. My second summer was MCAT summer. So during my application, because I wasn't taking a gap year, I really tried to put everything med school related into the summer so that I could focus on it. And so MCAT summer, I mostly studied for the MCAT. I also went into a research lab on campus about 10 hours a week. And there was truly nothing to speak for from that experience. Every day we went in, the samples didn't work, and then I would go home. And then we would repeat that every single day. So if you think that research is something that you really, really need, I ended up getting my research experience, but it was further down the line. It was while I was applying. And if they asked me about my projects, I probably wouldn't have been able to say, oh yes, that project, I can tell you all the intricacies of it. And people didn't really bring it up much. And so, yeah, that was my second summer. My third summer, which is the last one, that was application summer. So I wrote my primaries. I did not pre-write my secondaries, but if you're applying this coming cycle, I would recommend it highly. Everyone told me to do it and I thought, no, I don't need to. It is worth it to pre-write your secondaries. It doesn't have to be polished, just get some ideas down. And then while I was applying, I was working about 40 hours a week in a lab on campus, and that was too much time. It was very stressful. I would recommend leaving your application time just a little bit more sacred for yourself. But that's where I ended up getting in my research hours. But like, you have to note that I submitted my primary application in July. I started working in mid-June and I ended working in late August. So those were on my application. I was really just putting predicted hours and predicted things that I would get out of the experience. It wasn't even something that had a publication or it didn't have any results or findings, and it probably still doesn't because it's a very long-term basic science project. Yeah. And Irma has a really good question. So There are 50 to 51 people in our class. It's usually about 50, but we add on a couple here and there because we send some students to Florida for their second half of med school. So they do their classes with us for preclinical, and then when they go to the hospital, they're going to Florida to a hospital. So we have 50 plus or minus 2, given that we lose some students in the second half, but it's a small class size compared to most schools. I would say what I was interviewing at was usually about 150, maybe 200, maybe 250. So ours counts as a much smaller school, which means that the students that get in here might have different characteristics than other schools because they're choosing for a group of people that are extremely tight knit and will work well together. And whereas in a larger class size, you can kind of imagine that it's okay if not everybody gets along, but here they kind of make sure that everybody gets along. So that actually does shape the experience of our medical school experience of having only 50 people.
What a difference from Berkeley.
Such a difference. It was really funny starting at Berkeley with I took CS61A one semester, just, part of my exploration. But that's 2,200 people. And then here, 51 every single time. It's really bizarre. Yeah. And also the private versus public school experience is different. When I was interviewing at private schools, I'd go, is this what it's like? This is lovely. Everyone takes care of you. There's so much support. In Berkeley, the support is there. You just really have to look for it and make time for it. So it definitely changes. And then just to clarify, the third summer was the summer after my junior year, which was when I applied. I interviewed through the fall to slightly spring semester of my senior year, and then senior year I just started med school. Let's see, and I got another question. I don't know how to pronounce your name, I'm so sorry. So how did you feel like your experience as an EMT prepared you for medical school? Do you feel like it helped you in any way? Oh, absolutely. And this is purely a personal reason that it helped, was just that I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to do medicine. And so, and again, there's also the differentiation of medicine versus nursing versus PA versus PT. Like the realm of healthcare is so broad. And as much as I tried to explore, I still didn't see how much there is. And as a medical student, we interact with a lot of the staff. So I got to see OT for the first time as a medical student. And that's nothing that I had considered in the past. So I think I wasn't even set on healthcare. I think I always knew in the back of my head that would be something I'd be really happy doing. But then I thought mathematical biology, pure math, there were so many things that kind of crossed my plate. Every time I met somebody who was really passionate, very helpful and intelligent and was willing to walk me through their passions, I would just buy into their passion for a week or two until I realized that's their passion, it's not my passion. So the reason why being an EMT helped me so much was that was something that helped me differentiate, okay, at least healthcare. For me, there was something so special about seeing patients who they didn't always want your help. That was something that was really important to find out as an EMT. Often you got patients who were inebriated and just wanted you to get off their back. But there's something about knowing that at least you're acting from the depths of your heart to help them. You're doing things that you think are for their better good. And that was something that was very fulfilling, more fulfilling than, say, doing a PhD on a topic that I thought would be really fun. For a while, I thought animal behavior. I could go to Africa and watch hyenas for several years. That sounds pretty fun. But I think there's a different type of fulfillment from the interpersonal interactions I was having. So being an EMT, I had that side of things, and then it helped me decide on medicine in particular as an MD or DO. Because I really like the autonomy. I thought that I would kind of lose the teamwork aspect, which I was worried about, but you still have a lot of teamwork in healthcare as a physician. And yeah, I think I wanted to learn the most, just the absolute most. I'm a total nerd. I just want to know it all. And so I thought if I did any program that was less training, I think I wouldn't feel quite fulfilled. And so being an EMT for me helped me decide that. And then I think it also helped me with patient interactions and kind of a clinical intuition. I wouldn't say that those were skills that have like made me significantly better than any of my classmates, because a lot of them either have experiences that are similar from hospital volunteering or other jobs, or just are gifted with it. But I think for me, it has been helpful to build patient rapport, because I was horrible when I first started my EMT training. I would walk up to people and just kind of like freeze up, and I would get really anxious. And after a couple years of being an EMT and getting used to the, hi, my name is Ning McKenzie, I am a EMT medical student, whatever it is, and just kind of diving into that flow, that was helpful. And also just kind of getting a gauge for like, how bad is the situation? In EMT school, you learn about what the worst case scenario is. And so you go, okay, let me just make sure I walk into a room, I see a patient, and I have an immediate gauge for, is this a, hi, how are you doing? How are things going type of visit? Or is this like a, I'm really sorry that things are happening, tell me what's going on and how we can help you. So yeah, I think those are a couple ways that I think those helped prepare me. Yeah, hope that answered that question. Okay, we have reached our lull in questions.
So can you walk us through a typical day of what a first year was like, and how different, if that's different in your second year? And what did you do during the summer?
Good question. Let's see, a typical day in first year is not very different from second year, but there are some differences. So our school in particular does blocks, and these are details that you wouldn't have to know very early on. But if you're thinking a little bit further, if you're looking at which schools to apply to, or which schools you're interested in choosing, it kind of becomes relevant what type of education you want, what format. And so our school does blocks of like biochemistry, anatomy, and then second year we start doing just neurology, cardiology, pulmonology, and thinking of the organ blocks. So kind of like the basic science blocks and then the organ blocks. And so that's how we did it. And so we basically have really one class all day, every day. And then in our first year, it's scattering in some standardized patients. So standardized patients are basically just actors that come in with medical conditions, and you learn to practice interviewing skills on them and physical exam skills. So that was pretty classic for first year. So classic day, class from 8 to 12. From 1 to 5, sometimes we would have small group, which is kind of more interactive time with the material. And then sometimes in the afternoons, we would have basic doctoring, which is going and seeing standardized patients and practicing our clinical skills. And so that was pretty classic for first year. That didn't change a lot. And then our school does another thing that's a little bit different from others, is that we have selective weeks. And so selective weeks are essentially take your big 3-month summer vacation and spread it throughout your entire year. So instead of doing, a whole semester length of time, like 18 weeks straight, and then having 3 weeks off, or a month off in the winter, instead you have 6 weeks of class, 1 week off, 4 weeks of class, 1 week off. And so they scatter their selectives in there, and it's not necessarily vacation time. You're allowed to take it as vacation time, but you also have to meet like a minimum requirement of what you do productively. And what you can do productively is shadowing. So they set up a bunch of shadowing opportunities for us, and you enter a lottery. I did a lot of those, and they were really helpful in trying to decide my specialty. And then you can also say, read a book, write an essay about it, reflect on it. And one of the more fun things is you can just make your own. And so what's fun about talking to you guys is that as Cal students, you know what decals are. And I love decals, and I participated in many, and I started one, and like that was a really fundamental part of my Cal experience. And selectives are very similar to decals, because you can make one for yourself, but you can make one that you're teaching other people. And so right now I'm running a selective on the science of happiness and well-being tactics. So that's something that you wouldn't really say is directly medically related, but you can get course credit for that. You can also go learn how to do wilderness medicine, which is what I'm going to do on Friday, which I'm really excited for. And we go camping for 4 days, and you learn about what do you do if you encounter a medical emergency in the middle of nowhere. Very up my alley with like the EMT background. So for me, if I was during a block, the kind of 8 to 5 normal schedule was a typical day. And then during selective weeks, it could really be anything at all because there was so many options for what to do. Second year is similar. It's actually swapped. So in the morning we have advanced doctoring, step up from basic doctoring. And so that's where we're still seeing patients, but instead of seeing standardized patients, we're seeing real patients. We're not providing diagnoses or care or anything like that because we're still learning. But what we do get to do is talk to a patient about what physical ailments they're having, what medical conditions they're having, what it's like to have that happen. And often the most important part is not what symptoms do they have, but like, what is it really like to have those symptoms? It's a subtle distinction, but when you hear somebody tell you, oh, I can't walk because my feet hurt so much, it really has a difference than just seeing like foot pain on a list of symptoms. You hear about, oh my gosh, I couldn't get up at night. I had to crawl to the bathroom to go pee because my foot hurt so much. It's a very much more visceral reaction that you get as a student, and it helps us remember a lot better. So we get to go see patients probably 2 to 3 times a week in the morning, and then in the afternoon we have classes, same 1 to 5. So there's a lot of variety. As for my summer, our summer was again kind of fragmented. So I only had 4 weeks. I took all of those for vacation. I needed it and I just wanted to get out. So I went with one of my classmates to her hometown in Montana. And I went with another classmate to his hometown in Alaska. And then I went home to Berkeley where my mom lives and got to see family for a while. So it was a very fulfilling summer, very relaxing.
How did you deal with COVID through your coursework?
Great question. We did basically virtual, and we're still actually currently virtual because they plan things so far in advance that often the decisions are kind of lagging behind whatever the circumstances were. So currently we're doing virtual schooling, which has actually been doing fine. We still have small group and interaction. So we started with Zoom school. During anatomy, we would stagger our arrivals to go into lab. So we did get to do dissections on cadavers, which is another one of those things that you hear people ask about in interviews. I didn't really understand the difference, but in anatomy, there's either dissection lab or prosection lab. Dissection means that you have a intact cadaver, or at least partially intact cadaver, and you're making the cuts to see what the structures are. And a prosected cadaver is that that's already been done. You're just there to admire and learn and examine the structures that have been kind of displayed. So we were able to do mostly dissection, a few prosection, and then we would only go in basically one at a time into lab and have really personalized attention with the TAs for each group. So that's when we started doing in person. We went to fully hybrid back over the summer when the cases were lower, and so we could optionally go into the classroom and opt into in-person small groups, but we still have a virtual option if that was more comfortable for people, which has really been good for, I think, parents or people who live really far. It's kind of nice to have that option. So yeah, it's been kind of a constant adaptation. Each block is different, but we've been able to work around it pretty well.
How was the move from Berkeley to Arizona?
Oh, it was so hot. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's from Arizona, but my goodness, it's so hot here in the summer. It was, I think, 115 the first day I moved in mid-July, and I was questioning a lot of decisions as I was like hauling my couch up the stairs. The main thing I was questioning was, why did I move on the second floor? But I think culturally it's very different. That's something that people consider when they're looking at schools across the country. I grew up mostly in Berkeley, which is its own very distinct culture, especially politically, and Arizona is much more kind of middle ground in a lot of aspects there. So it's been a great learning experience, kind of getting used to people from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And you know, as a healthcare provider, you want to be non-judgmental and make sure that that doesn't impact their care. So it is really good to see people that you, as you're talking with them, you may completely disagree with them, but that doesn't really affect the visit. You're just moving on with it. So that's been a little bit different. I think Berkeley's a really wonderful city and I missed a lot. It's much more green. There's a lot of desert and a lot of sand here, but I found things that I've really loved. So the nice thing about Phoenix is we're in Scottsdale as a campus. And in Scottsdale, the nice thing about Scottsdale is the area around here, it's very residential, very spread out. But if you wanted to go into downtown Phoenix, you would have a city there. During non-COVID times, of course, there's concerts and there's festivals and there's a bunch of farmers markets, which I love. And then if you drive in the other direction and try to get away from everybody, there are so many places. There's Sedona, which is like world famous, beautiful nature. Grand Canyon's only 3 hours. Antelope Canyon, all the Utah parks are also about a day's drive. Flagstaff, you can go skiing. There's so much around the area that has helped me kind of fill in the gaps that I was like, oh, Tahoe is gone, but I have Flagstaff. You know, San Francisco's gone, but I can deal with Phoenix. You know, different things like that have kind of filled in all the gaps that I was missing and then added on the Grand Canyon and other beautiful places. So it hasn't been a bad transition at all. Actually, when people ask me that, I couldn't even say that I had much of a transition. It just happened. And then I was here and I was happy. Yeah, I got another, I have another couple questions. So how did you choose what medical schools to apply to? Location, curriculum, specialty focus? This is a very good question. And I asked it to a lot of people. I ended up trying to kind of compile everything that I heard from people in terms of what they decided on. And I found that nothing, like everybody's decision-making process is very different. I think for me personally, people would say like location, curriculum. I haven't heard specialty focus quite as much, but I do know that that crosses people's minds. Cost of living, cost of attendance. I think location is really a big one for a lot of people. So if you're trying to see family, if you're trying to see an SO, that can really make a difference. And it's not even the location itself, but how close to an airport are you? Because you can live in Phoenix and New York City, and that's probably closer than, you know, like Iowa and, you know, another kind of smaller state with less transportation nearby. So that's a really big one that people choose. When you haven't been to the school, it's really hard to choose what schools to apply to. I think I had more of less of a research focus, more of not necessarily humanities, but probably some like humanism aspect to my application. I've never like researched all that much, although it's growing on me. But when I was applying, I think I put Stanford on the list and I thought, well, they talk a lot about research in their application and they seem to care a lot about research, but you know, I'm going to give it my shot and I'm glad I did. But at the end of the day, it probably wasn't a very good fit. And I think if I had gone back, I wouldn't have applied to a school that's so research focused. Let's see, other things. I would always check if there was an Asian grocery store close by so that I could get some of the flavors and cooking ingredients that I really liked. And I'm only 20 minutes away from one now, which is close enough for me. Curriculum is an interesting one. A lot of people asked about curriculum during my interviews and I didn't understand. I didn't even know what step one was. And if you don't know what step one was, I didn't even know when I was applying. So basically it's like the MCAT equivalent to when you're in medical school. So you take it to help you apply to residency, which is, you know, undergrad, medical school, residency. And so it's the next step there. And so people would ask about how much time do they give you for step one, or does the curriculum prepare you for that? And I think the answer is, if people are going to the school and they're graduating from the school and they're matching to residency, it works. They're not there to screw over the students in any way. And any school that you go to that's an accredited medical school, whether that's MD or DO, is going to get you there. And so I never found curriculum to be something that I would mind a lot. I think the only thing that I would say I ended up deciding was that I really liked Mayo's selective system. It's the only school that I personally know of that has so frequent of breaks, not necessarily vacation, but breaks from material. And so that was a curriculum that I thought was very unique that I ended up really basing a large part of my decision on. Otherwise, if they say we do 18 months of preclinical and then 2.5 years in the clinic versus 2 years preclinical and 2 years in the clinic, I think that there's data to say one is better than the other, but you're still going to get there. It doesn't make that big of a difference. And specialty focus, similarly, I would say I wasn't really sure what I was interested in. Honestly, my top 3 then are still my top 3 now after a lot of reshuffling, and it's a cyclic thing. But you never, most people change their mind from when they apply to when they go to a school. So if you're really interested in something super competitive like plastic surgery, maybe you could base your decision on going to a highly ranked school or that's more prestigious because of that. But I would say that the chances are so high that you're going to change your mind. It doesn't really matter if their plastic surgery department's any better than any other places. I have another question about how many schools did I apply to and how many interviews did I get? So I applied to too many medical schools. Whatever Joe tells you is correct, because she told me it's too many and it was too many. Let's see, I applied to somewhere between 30 and 40. I didn't finish all the secondaries for that, but my first toss out into the universe, I did probably 37. And I finished most of those secondaries, but after a certain point, I thought, there's enough schools here. I'm tired. I've been working too much. So I ended up just kind of teetering off at the end of the secondaries. And then I got, I think, interviews at about a quarter or a third of those. So it's about 8 interviews all across the country, mostly located in California and in the state of New York, just because I think those have a super high concentration of schools. So just kind of like if you scattered my interviews with the map of where medical schools are, was pretty accurate. Yeah, I don't think it was super location focused, although if you're a Califestan, that certainly helps you a little bit with California schools, but the UCs are so good that you really have no guarantee, unfortunately. How did I manage UC Berkeley, extracurricular, and med school application all together? Yeah, I don't know how I did it. This is why I'm like, first year of medical school? This is not bad. I didn't have to do so much. So yeah, the things that I was really focused on during undergrad was being a math major and finishing my major. The extracurriculars associated with the math department and with pre-med things, and then just like purely pre-med. So those are really the few things that I was very focused on. And I think everyone knows that grades matter. And so that always took some priority, but I think it took less of a priority as time went on. I started realizing that you can always put so much more time into studying and end up having such a marginal difference. But if you had taken those 8 hours and put it into a volunteering experience that kind of regenerated your energy and strengthened your application, give you more patient experiences, if that 8 hours could give you like a 5% bump in a grade versus doing all that for you, I started prioritizing my volunteer work a lot more as time went on. And that was partially just because I got confident in my abilities to perform well in school. It wasn't always an A, but if I was able to do pretty well with a significantly less time, I was pretty satisfied with that. If I could use that time and do something better that I was perceiving as better. And so I would like book in my volunteer days. I would put those in stone. And then if I ended up not being able to study for kind of like a low level quiz the next day, I thought, okay, that's fine. It all kind of goes into the pile of what ifs. But in the end, I made sure that my GPA was at a place that I was comfortable with. And that's a very independent decision depending on where you want to go. But as long as my GPA was about the right place, I would really prioritize my volunteer experiences, extracurriculars, and campus leadership was something that it didn't even feel like I was making the decision to spend time on it, because it was something that I really, really wanted to do. So most of the time I spent with my clubs was like, it just happens. It's not even, oh, I'm going to go do this instead of study. It was just, this is what I'm going to do. So, but you have to first kind of gauge what you're comfortable with academically, because you don't want to overextend yourself. You need to get your sleep. I get so much sleep right now, and I did not get as much in undergrad, and I regret that a lot. So, you know, have your priorities, you know, start with your health. You know, mental health, of course, is up there, family and social relationships, and then, you know, make sure that your GPA is somewhere in a range that you like, and then what's fulfilling you, what's giving you energy, that if it also looks good on your application in some way, it could be that you love playing guitar, that's that could look good on your application. You know, put time into those things, because they end up kind of earning you more time if they're giving you back energy. Got another question for, how did you prepare for the MCAT and how long did it take? What would you say is the most important extracurriculum? Okay, so for the first one, preparing for the MCAT and how long did it take? I think I had a spreadsheet with my schedule. It must have been about between 11 and 16 weeks, which is too broad of a range. About 3 months. I would think it was like probably 11 weeks. And that summer, again, I would go into lab maybe 10 hours a week, but a lot of that was also studying. And then I also went and visited some people and traveled a bit in the middle of that, which was kind of a weird time to put my travel time, but it was good to unwind. So about 3 months, and I really gave myself lots of time, mostly because I didn't take biochem before I took the MCAT, which was probably not a very good decision. It just didn't work out with the timing of not taking a gap year. So if you have a gap year, almost always you're able to take all of your prerequisite courses. Maybe physics AP sometimes takes the back seat, and I think that's probably fine. Biochem is one of those things that you really should take. So I self-taught myself biochem over the summer, spent about a month and a half doing that, and then finally started the rest of my preparation. And so by the time I had gotten to the rest of it, it was so rushed that I had to extend my MCAT date and postpone it, and it was a little stressful. So again, if you can take your biochem class, which I took MCBC 100A because I liked OChem, but you can also take 102, 100, C100. Today is the same as Chem 135. Maybe that's the same as C100, I forget. But yeah, so MCAT took me about that long, given the extra time for biochem. But the rest of it, I was really focusing on taking practice tests kind of all the time to build up my endurance, even if I wasn't doing particularly well. And then the second question that I got was, what would you say is the most important extracurriculum? That is a question that I wish I knew the answer for you. This depends so much on the person. I think if I were to say for most people, and this is so individual, but in general, I think it's important to have an extracurricular activity that is some type of medical, scientific, interpersonal extracurricular, just because they want to know that you're interested in using science to help people and doing that in a way that you are having interactions with them, because almost every specialty you're going to be going to and talking to patients about their health. And so even if obviously this depends on the person, and the advisors would have better advice, but I would say something where you're interacting with people, even if it's in a non-medical capacity, even like if you have to earn money to afford college and you're working a service industry job, that's something that you could still really reflect on and get a lot of value from on your application. So if you're having to support yourself and do that anyways, you know, don't think that you're going to be any lesser than any other applicant because you don't have the time or ability, because it really depends on what you're getting out of the experience. It's not necessarily what it says on paper. Whatever category you're putting it in, that doesn't say much. It's really what description can you give them, because you get to describe what it meant to you and what you did. If you can say, yeah, working at this restaurant taught me a lot about what it's like to be working with people who are unhappy with you, that's something that you might experience as a doctor. That's a very valuable skill. Oh, another question on MCAT. So what materials did I use? Good question. I actually had spent a lot of time on deciding what to use for MCAT preparation. And if you email me, I ended up writing up some notes for that, but and I'm happy to share because it's been a while. But from what I remember, I used a combination of things that I could find. So I used Kaplan biochemistry, which is because I needed to know everything from the ground up. I used Kaplan biology. I used Khan Academy, psychology and sociology, and physics. I think for chemistry, I just really liked chemistry to start with, and I had taken it recently enough that I didn't spend a lot of time doing content review. And then for cars, there's online websites. I think it's Jack Weston has free passages, and then you can also get some free practice tests online. So for cars, it was more of like a consistent practicing. There's not much you can really learn there, just practice. And so I did all of those, and then I would use AMC materials a little bit later after I'd done most of my content review, but that's what I thought would happen in my head. I ended up doing content review to the last week. So in reality, I just kind of said, okay, a week out from the test, or 4 days out from the test, you have to do one of the AMC tests. 4 days before that, you do another AMC and kind of put them at the end, but still end up doing them even if you're not completely done with all of your preparation, because it's just good to get used to testing format, get used to passages, things like that. And then the way I approach content review, let's see, I did it in a very chaotic way. It wasn't as organized as I wish it was. I think for biochem, again, starting from the ground up, I just did a chapter at a time, just kept going. Just like you would, you can think of like one of the classes that you get, and you get a syllabus and they spread out, chapters 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, and they kind of spread out a little bit, kind of front load the material, just to give yourself some wiggle room. And then if you do that by kind of setting yourself up a course schedule, for example, if you're saying, okay, I'm really going to focus on these 4 subjects, you can kind of space it out in the same way that you would imagine it seen in a syllabus, and put goals for yourself. I'm going to review these few chapters and these several subjects. It's up to you whether you want to do all of the subjects throughout the entire course. If you want to do one subject, focus on it, let it go. That is really up to you. And it really took me like the full 11 weeks to finish content review, just because I was doing, you can either do content review, finish it, and then just take tests for the rest of your preparation. I just opted for the thought that taking the test will help me. There's a thing called the testing effect in medical education, or just education in general. Basically, when you take a test, your brain is firing the neural pathways to solidify the material more. My roommate does a lot of medical education, so she shares a lot of interesting papers. But apparently, even if you don't know the answer, whether you got it right or wrong, just the process of being tested on something and thinking through the question actually furthers your understanding of the topic. And so with practice tests, you are getting the answer as well. So that even makes it, you benefit even more from that experience. So I think it's helpful to test along, but that's not everybody's preference. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water as more questions roll in.
Yeah, and while she's doing that, we recommend 300 hours minimum preparation time, which is about 7.5 weeks of Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So that's kind of gives sort of a bookend of what is sort of a minimum preparation with content review and plenty of practice exams too. So that's really interesting to hear, the neural pathway being reinforced by testing. I like that.
Yeah, I like to think of that a lot, because you have to make a decision when you have so much to study in such limited time, whether you're going to do your review by reading things. So I think a lot of people get their Kaplan books and they just read through them. But then you have to decide, okay, am I just going to read through my slides, or am I going to write myself questions and think about those questions and answer them for myself There's some different approaches, but I think if you look at the data, it's a little more painful, but you end up learning so much more when you really actively engage with the material and kind of challenge yourself into kind of like forcing yourself into knowing it.
Yeah, great. We only have a few minutes left. Any other questions that you have in there? I don't see any on my end, on the everyone. Did you have any other questions in there?
I don't have any more private messages, but just if I missed any, let me know. Just send me another message.
I guess one of my questions was, when do you take your step 1 and step 2 and start clinical? So you said about 18 months of learning.
Yeah, so yeah, this is a good thing to kind of understand before you enter this path. There's going to be so much testing that I really found out like months ago, just a few months ago, how many more tests I have to take in my life. So you enter medical school and you do either 18 to 24 months of preclinical. And so that's doing a lot of your book learning. And step 1 is to test you on your book learning. Then you do your clinical rotations and clerkships, which is basically going to the hospital in one specific specialty. After each of those, of which there are probably, gosh, I think about 6 or 7, you also take a test every single time. So, you know, we're adding up to about 8 tests. Those are called your shelf exams. And then you get to step 2, which is also on clinical knowledge, just kind of a more overarching one. And I think you take that in your 3rd year, and that's also used for residency. That's test number 8 or 9. And then you also have a step 2 CK, which there's also step 2 CS, which has, I think, been just removed altogether just because it wasn't very helpful in differentiating people, which is a great thing because it's much cheaper. A great thing from my perspective. And so now you only have step 2 and step 2 CK, which I think is optional, but you take it to look better for residencies if you think that would help. And then you're done for medical school in terms of testing. So, you know, 8 to 9 tests in. And then you go to residency and you take your step 3. And I'm sure it gets worse from there because then you have board exams. So there are many poor test takers that go into medicine and make it through. And I've talked to them and they are able to stand out for many, many other reasons. But if you are not a good test taker and you just hate tests, it's good to be aware of how many there are, because I found out so recently that there's a step 3 and I was like, are you kidding me? I thought this was it.
That's interesting. I feel like that's something that I know, but maybe we should talk about that a little bit more to students and make sure they know the rest of it once you get in.
Yeah, you don't get to be a doctor immediately, but it's all very worth it in the end. And I'm happy that I'm doing this for sure.
Great. So my final question is, do you have a residency specialty that you're leaning towards at this point?
I would say at this point, I'm interested in dermatology. I've been doing a lot of specialty exploration, and I've been every specialty for about a week now. And but as I said, I came into medical school interested in dermatology for really nothing more than the fact that it's something you can see. And I was interested in primary care. I'm still interested in primary care, emergency medicine, surgery. And I've been exploring all of those. And I think just over time, different things have kind of settled into place. And I think that's currently my number 1, but I really like gynecology. I'm going to try out urology next month and just kind of see what goes from there. Yeah.
Well, Ning, thank you so much for, being here and talking to us. That was really interesting, and really appreciated that. And I appreciate everybody here for joining us. Thank you so much for coming and staying. And I hope you learned as much as I did. I always learn more from my students than reading or finding out other ways. So really appreciate that. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody for coming. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ning.
Yes, of course, anytime. And if you ever want to email me, Ning McKenzie at berkeley.edu, I'm happy to answer questions.